Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Southern Gal True Crime. I am Dawn. If this is your first time here, welcome. And today I have a cold case missing person video that I wanted to share with you. It is the case of Barbara Cotton out of Williston, North Dakota from 1982. And I have had several requests to share Barbara's story to get her name out there. Her case has still not been solved. Definitely needs attention, so that is why I wanted to share it with you today. Barbara was 15 years old, white female. She was 5'2", 100 pounds, with brown hair and hazel brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a light tan summer jacket, Wrangler brand blue jeans, a blue pullover blouse, and rust-colored suede loafers. Now, when Barbara disappeared, she did leave behind her eyeglasses. They said that wasn't uncommon for her to do, but she also left behind a carton of cigarettes, her paycheck, and the money in her savings account, which is never a good sign when somebody disappears. If they don't take any money, um, uh, any paychecks, like I said, any money in their savings account. Uh, Unknown if she took any personal belongings, such as her purse or anything, with her when she disappeared. Um, just a little bit of background information on Barbara. Barbara Louise Cotton was born on November 10th, 1965, in Tioga, North Dakota, to Louise, Lolly, and John Cotton. There was a 19-year difference between their oldest child and their youngest, and Barbara was the seventh of 8 children. When Barbara, who went by Barb to most who knew her, was about 7 years old, her parents divorced. Her mother, Louise, moved to Williston, North Dakota, with the 3 youngest children. Barb's brother, Kent, was a year older, and their sister, Kathy, was 2 years younger. And now the 5 older children were adults at the time that the divorce happened, and they were already living on their own. So initial reports regarding Barbara's disappearance were based on reports made to the Williston Police Department by her mother. Um, Her mother said that Barbara had dinner with Stacy Werder, who was a man that was identified as her boyfriend. It's unknown if he was actually her boyfriend, because apparently her family and friends had not heard about this Stacy Werder. So there's some confusion about whether he was actually her boyfriend or just an acquaintance. But at any rate, um, Stacy and Barbara and her mother had gone out to eat at Cakes and Cones, which was a downtown restaurant, on the evening of April 11th, 1981. Louise did inform the police that she was told by Stacy Werder that following the dinner, he offered to walk Barbara home, but Barbara said that she wanted to walk alone. He said he watched her walk away toward Recreation Park, which was just a few blocks away from where Barbara lived. But unfortunately, Barbara never made it home, and she was never seen again. Now, while there were reports that Barbara was at a party possibly that same evening, the fact remains that after April 11th, 1981, Barbara was never seen again by her family or her friends. According to Detective Amber Cohn with the Williston Police Department, police records show that Louise Cotton called the police around 4 p.m. on April 12th to report Barbara missing. Later that week, a brief story about Barbara's disappearance, along with a photo and a plea urging those with information on Barbara's whereabouts to call either the police or Louise Cotton. The story ran in the Friday issue of the Williston Daily Herald. Time passed, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and unfortunately, those months have turned into years. So for the past 43 years, Barbara's case has flummoxed law enforcement as well as her friends and family, who are all left with a number of questions. Of those, the main question is what happened to Barbara Cotton? The mystery of Barbara's disappearance is a cold case, Cone explained. Uh, she said that by definition, quote, it will be open and under investigation until we get closure on it, adding that law enforcement investigates tips and leads it receives regarding the case. Right now, I just want to read some excerpts from this comes from findbarbcotton.com, and I will put a link to it in the description box of the video. It says the most common version of the last time that anyone saw Barb goes something like this. She was last seen on April 11th, 1981, after having dinner with her boyfriend and another friend in downtown Williston. After dinner, her boyfriend offered to walk her home, but Barb declined. From the corner that the Plainsman Hotel occupied, her boyfriend watched her walk into Recreation Park, and she has never been seen or heard from again. Now, this scenario, it says, seems to be based off police reports, as I said earlier, made by Barbara's mother, Louise Cotton. It goes on to say, after 40 years, there's only a few things that are clear. Barb has never been seen or heard from again. No remains have been found that have been matched to Barbara. There have been no arrests made in connection with her disappearance. And the people that should have been questioned after she disappeared apparently have never been questioned. At the very least, there doesn't seem to be any records regarding them being questioned, and the worst part is that many of them have since passed away. Now, this does include, it says, 2 out of the 3 individuals that Williston police have publicly named as a person of interest or persons of interest in Barbara's disappearance. So one of these individuals, and perhaps they say the most interesting person of interest, is Barb's, quote, boyfriend. It says that they write boyfriend because Barb's close friends do not recall her having any boyfriend, and no one besides Barb's mother recalls knowing that this person even existed. And it says, before we go down any rabbit holes, the writer says, I'll just say that we do know that he does exist or existed. We also know that it is likely that he was in Williston when Barb disappeared. We have yet to find anyone else that can positively place him there. However, we know that he was not a fictional character. Louise stated in her call to police on April 12th that she last saw Barb in the company of a new boyfriend, Stacy Werder, who we talked about earlier when I was giving you the basic information. Apparently, he used to wash dishes at Cakes and Cones, which is where they, Barb and Barbara's mother, Louise, had dinner the night that she disappeared. Stacy Werder, it says, is by far one of the biggest mysteries in this case. There's plenty of reasons to be suspicious of Stacy. However, there are also a couple of reasons why he may be an unlikely suspect. There are also plenty of issues that arise anytime that they try to gain any clarity on anything involving him. It is believed and seemed likely that Stacy left Williston for Montana within a day or 2 of Barb's disappearance, and they can verify that by June he was definitely there. They say it is possible that if Stacy Werder did leave Williston right away, he already possibly had plans to do it prior to April 11th. Louise stated that Stacy used to wash dishes at Cakes and Cones, so it is unclear exactly when Stacy worked there and when he stopped working there. And maybe he had already quit, possibly because he had found a new job, maybe in Montana. They do know what they do know about Stacy Werder. He was born October 5th, 1959 in Eureka, California. He was described by classmates as a smaller guy. They remember him being very smart. They said he was always a nice guy. His sisters agree that he was extremely intelligent. He could be very nice. However, they also recall episodes where Stacy would become extremely violent in an instant. So that is a disturbing fact. He did attack members of his own family. They do not seem to doubt that he was attempting to take the life of these members of his family that he attacked in these situations. One of his sisters went on to say that he was in the Navy in 1980, but he was discharged after they diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. The symptoms of schizophrenia typically start to manifest in the late teens to early 20s in males and the late 20s to early 30s in females. They said, however, there are exceptions. It is rare for the disease to be diagnosed before the age of 12 or after the age of 40. His sister also said that Stacy did not drive. She said he was a drifter. He hitchhiked everywhere. And when he would come home, he told stories about going to places like Canada and Texas. And at one point, their brother even accompanied Stacy on the road for a while. One of the last times that Stacy was home, apparently he nearly strangled their father to death with an extension cord. After that, Stacy was told to leave and not to come back, and he left. Louise called police again on April 13th and told them that she thought that Barb could be with Stacy in Scobie, Montana at the Pioneer Hotel in room 205. So that is very specific information right down to the room number. Williston Police Department received word back from law enforcement in Montana that Barbara was not there. There's nothing that indicates if Stacy was there or not, and they aren't sure how Louise got this information. That is one thing that I was wondering, is where Louise got this information. They say there are a couple of logical theories, but there are countless possibilities as well. Louise was friends with the owner of Cakes and Cones, and they might have known that Stacy was headed to Scobie, or Stacy could have told Louise himself when he met her. They say that they don't actually know if Stacy was in Scobie. It's only Louise. So Louise was the only one that places him there, or even in Williston. However, there is someone else who believes that it was likely Stacy that was with Barbara that night. So apparently, as we talked about once again earlier, it seems likely that Barbara did attend a party at the 18th Street Apartments the night that she disappeared. In 1985, an article ran in the Bismarck Tribune. Louise states that she returned home from work around 11 p.m. She talked to Barbara. Barbara said she would be home and that she was going to work in the morning at the Country Kitchen. The court document Louise filed to declare Barbara deceased in 1998 stated that Barbara was last seen by a friend walking from the Plainsman Hotel around midnight. So they say maybe Louise met with or saw Barbara, Stacy, and another friend earlier in the evening. From there, Barbara attended the party, and maybe Stacy or another friend left the party with Barbara, and they parted ways around midnight outside of the Plainsman Hotel. So how did they speak? Was Barb at home getting ready to go to the party when Louise got home? Was Barb already at the party and they spoke on the phone? Louise did have the host phone number. She called there numerous times in the months following Louise's disappearance. Louise would ask, or following Barb's disappearance. And Louise would ask if there was anything at all that the girl could remember about the night of the party. This woman and her sister recall Barb attending a party at her apartment. They admit that after 40 years, it is hard to say with absolute certainty that it was the night that Barb disappeared. However, they do feel very strongly that it was. And also, they say, why else would Louise continue to call them if she wasn't, maybe not absolutely sure, but pretty sure that it was the same night. They do recall that Barb did attend the party with a boy, and after seeing photos, they think it is possible that it was Stacy Werder. One sister remembers Barb leaving with her boyfriend, and the boyfriend returned later alone. She also recalls asking where Barb went, and the boyfriend told her that Barb got a ride, but didn't elaborate further, didn't give any other details. The other sister recalls being told that Barb's boyfriend stopped at the apartment the following day, demanding to know where Barb was. Now, unknown if this boyfriend was Stacy Werder or not. It says precise, clear, complete, verifiable. These are not words you're likely to hear used to describe the timeline leading up to Barb's disappearance. Barb's childhood friend Sandy Evanson recalls Louise calling her house and waking her up the night that Barb disappeared. She said it was very late. In fact, it was the early morning hours of April 12th. And Sandy remembers a sinking feeling that something must be wrong when the phone rang that late or that early in the morning. Louise asked Sandy if she knew where Barbara was. Sandy hadn't been with Barb that night, and it was odd that Louise was asking. Barb and Sandy, along with Barb's siblings, became fast friends when the Cotton family moved to Williston. However, Barb and Sandy hadn't spent much time together since Sandy, who was a year older, went on to high school. Sandy had been roller skating that evening at Willowile. When they closed for the night at 12 a.m., she walked home, and she recalls having an eerie feeling that something wasn't right. Sandy's father was a former police officer, and he kept his daughter on a shorter leash than Louise could keep Barb on, apparently. Louise, being a single mother who worked all the time to keep the bills paid, she wasn't home to supervise as much as she probably would have liked to have been. Sandy's mother and Louise were good friends, and Sandy remembers Louise talking about Barb's disappearance. She recalls what Louise told them, which was that Louise actually attended dinner with Barb and Stacy. She also recalls that Louise had been happy because the interaction had gone very well. Louise and Barb had been butting heads around that time about Barbara dating and partying, and naturally, Louise had been happy that the tide seemed to be shifting that day. Another friend, Diane, who was very close to Barb when she disappeared, described their friendship and why she has never believed that Barb ran away. Barb and Diane were extremely close. They told each other everything. They spent the majority of their free time together, as teenage best friends do. Diane said they loved going to coffee shops and scary movies together. Barb was at Diana's house a lot of the time. And at one point, Barb actually wanted to move in with Diana and her family, but Louise would not allow it, and this was another source of conflict between Louise and Barbara. The two girls worked at local diners. They were saving money to get their own apartment when they turned 16. Diane worked at the Thunderbird Cafe, and Barbara worked at the Country Kitchen. Diana was set to get married in July of 1981. Barb had her dress already, or at the very least, she had it ordered for her role as a maid of honor. And at this point in time, no one is sure if Barb had already picked up her dress or if Louise had picked it up after Barb disappeared. However, Louise did keep it for many years, ultimately giving it to her granddaughter, who still has it today. In hindsight, Diane seems to realize that the week that Barb went missing, they hadn't been hanging out as much as usual. She didn't notice it at the time. Nothing occurred to her as being different at that time. So that brings up the question, was something different that week? Apparently Barb had a new boyfriend, possibly. Maybe he was the difference. He was the reason that things were different that week. Diana believes that she would have been the first person to know about Barbara having any new boyfriend, and she had no knowledge of this guy, whether it be Stacy Werder or somebody else. She does admit that she does not think that Louise would lie about something like that, and that Louise's story never changed over the years, but she can't help but question how she or anyone else had heard absolutely nothing about him. And that is true. For the most part, if a teenage girl has a new boyfriend, she's going to tell her friends about it first. She might not even tell her family, her mom, dad, about this a new boyfriend. But speaking as a former teenage girl, I can tell you I would definitely tell. If I didn't tell anybody else, I would tell my best friends, my best girlfriends. As mentioned earlier, Barb and Diane didn't hang out as often as they usually did in the days leading up to Barbara's disappearance. However, Diane did speak to Barb on the phone on April 10th. Barb had said that she was staying at, Diana doesn't remember the girl's name, at another girl's house, and that they were going to take a dog to the vet the next morning. She has never believed that Barb would just run away. Diane's wedding was a few months away, and Barb would be 16 in November, which is only 6 months away. Barb could get the apartment that she had been working to save money for. Plus, Barb knew that she was welcome at her house if she ever needed somewhere to go. Diane says that she's never had another friend that she has been as close with as she was close to Barb. When Barb disappeared, she left a paycheck at home along with all of the money in her savings account. She also left behind a nearly full carton of cigarettes and all of her clothing. So, like I said earlier, says here, what runaway leaves behind all their money, cigarettes, clothing, and their personal belongings. To me, that does not make any sense. Obviously, if you're going to run away, you're going to take clothes, you're going to take money, you're going to take your cigarettes if you smoke. It's just does not make sense. Very perplexing. It goes on to say, at this point in the story, most people become skeptical of Louise. They wonder why all of the information is coming from her alone. They wonder how she gets the information that she's giving to police and why she is feeding it to them. This says fair enough. There's nothing to prove or disprove what Louise is saying, apparently. But to what end is Louise saying this? Why would she track Barb's, quote, boyfriend across Montana when police didn't seem particularly interested in him anyway? Maybe she was panicking, wondering where Louise or where Barb was. That would make sense. They say it's certainly a logical thought progression, or was it just that Louise felt like she was the only one investigating Barbara's disappearance? There does seem to be extremely little, if any, documentation that police conducted much of an investigation or even did much as far as interviews in the years following Barbara's disappearance. Current investigators note that they don't see documentation really pick up in Barb's file until the late 1980s. So was Louise conducting her own investigation and passing information to the police, or is it possible she was trying to lead them astray? The Williston PD shared the original police report from Louise Cotton, and this is from April 12th, 1981. It says, call from Louise Cotton of her address. She listed reporting that her daughter Barbara has not come home since yesterday. She's a 15-year-old. It lists the date of birth, a brown hair and eyes, small build, wearing a tan short jacket, blue jeans, was last seen at a friend's house at about 10 p.m. last night, was with a guy by the name of Stacy earlier in the evening. Stacy used to wash dishes at Cakes and Cones. Mrs. Cotton contacted him and he advised her that, quote, she told him she was going to walk home from Cakes and Cones. Miss Cotton feels that there's another person. They did not list the person's name, but Barbara, apparently, Miss Cotton felt that this person may know where Barbara was, but is not telling. On Monday, April 13th, it says Louise Cotton called, and she reports that she thinks her daughter is in Scobie, Montana, with a Stacy Werder. They might be in room 205 at the Pioneer Hotel. We talked about that earlier. Now, on July 15th, apparently, Stacy was arrested in Malta, Montana, for disorderly conduct regarding an incident at the Villa Theater. It says Stacy hung himself in jail that night at approximately 1:30 a.m., which is just over 3 months after Barbara disappeared. He had previously been arrested on June 12th of 1981, and he served 10 days in Glasgow, Montana for a similar charge. Now, it does have a note that says Stacy's sister mentioned that there was an incident on a nearby reservation where Stacy ended up being beat up and robbed prior to being arrested, but she didn't indicate which arrest that pertained to. It says, goes on to say, I feel, the writer says, I feel that it is worth mentioning that studies indicate that 5 to 10% of people with schizophrenia will ultimately take their own life. The risk of self-harm in these individuals is significantly higher for young adults and also increased when they aren't receiving any treatment for their condition. So I'm assuming the reason that they added this in is if you have a Stacy Werder who was a possible or was named as a person of interest, some people might say that he took his own life because he was guilty, because he possibly could have been the one to have something to do with Barbara's disappearance. But like I said here, it could also be because of the schizophrenia. So it says another possible example of Louise conducting her own investigation is that Louise spoke with Stacy's mother, Cynthia Werder, over the phone. So this is from September 1st of 1981. And Stacy's mom says Mrs. Werder, Stacy's mother, called about 3 weeks ago. She gave her phone number, and she said that Stacy talked about Barb before he took his own life. Said if Barb comes back to tell her to call Mrs. Werder, Mrs. Cotton will call back with that phone number, and she does. So Stacy's sisters recall their mothers did speak with Louise on the telephone on a few occasions. They aren't sure who called who first or when contact was initiated. They remember that their mother referred to Barb as Stacy's girlfriend, and it could be because Louise told Cynthia that they were a couple. However, if Stacy really did speak to his mother about Barb, then it stands to reason that he probably referred to Barb as his girlfriend. Another thing Stacy's sisters remember about the conversations between the two mothers is that when their mother told them that Barb was missing, they suspected their brother had something to do with it immediately. So that is very important, very telling. They said it is not because Stacy would have premeditated it, but because of the way they had witnessed him snap into violence in the past. The feeling that he was in some way involved has never left them. Throughout the years, Stacy's sisters were never spoken to by any law enforcement agency, not because they were unwilling to talk, but no one ever reached out to them. They assumed that it had been handled and that no one needed information from them about their brother. They also don't think that their mother ever spoke to anyone that questioned Stacy's involvement. The reason being that if anyone had even hinted that Stacy might have been the suspect, Cynthia would have been livid and they would have heard all about it. Cynthia never seemed willing to believe or to even discuss that Stacy had taken his own life. Louise and Cynthia seemed similar in this aspect. Maybe Louise sensed that Cynthia would become defensive over questions. Maybe Louise chose not to pry because she wanted to keep that line of communication open. As James Woolner pointed out in the Dakota Spotlight podcast, maybe they were just two mothers who both lost a child and they were seeking comfort in one another. And that would make sense to me. Stacy's sister answered a collect call from Stacy while he was in the Malta jail. He told her that he was coming home. She expressed concern about her new dog not knowing him and that it might bite him. He told her the way that he was coming home that it wouldn't matter. So that might possibly be an indication that he was at least thinking about taking his own life when he made that phone call. He also told her that he needed her to tell their mother that he loved her and that he was sorry for what he had done. So that is also a very, in my opinion, a very telling statement. When Stacy took his own life, his death certificate listed his occupation as laborer in the oil fields. He passed away on July 16th, 1981. After his death, his sisters remembered that someone named Red brought Cynthia Stacy's belongings. They aren't sure how Red knew Stacy or how he ended up in possession of Stacy's things. They do remember that he drove a red pickup truck and he had a couple of guys with him when he went to California. Sometime after he delivered Stacy's things, Red found himself in trouble and served time in prison. It took months, however, and they did finally find Red. He told them that he picked Stacy up outside of Malta while Stacy was hitchhiking. They had camped together for about a week before Stacy was arrested, and he doesn't recall anything suspicious about Stacy, and he did not hear anything about Barb. And this is a sketch of Stacy Werder. It was created based on Stacy's Navy photo and a photo of him with longer hair. And so apparently Stacy wasn't the only person of interest who took his own life in jail. Frank de la Pena was working in Williston at the time of Barb's disappearance. And within weeks, he had what seemed like a mental breakdown. He was hospitalized in Williston on May 1st and released on the 2nd. While there, he saw a psychiatrist and he underwent observation. He lost his job working for Cephal on a local seismology crew. De La Pena stayed on at the Williston KOA in his travel trailer for a few more days, and on May 5th, he hooked it up to his white Ford van and he headed for Rawlins, Wyoming. On May 7th, traveling from Riverton to Rawlins, De La Pena started what seemed like a desperate mission to lure young women, girls, and even a little boy into his trailer along the way. He would tell them that he needed to rehome a husky puppy, and they had to come inside to help him find it. He failed numerous times before reaching Rawlins. That is very, very disturbing, obviously. In my opinion, he is a predator, was a predator. But it goes on to say that unfortunately he was successful in Rawlins. At 7 p.m. in broad daylight at a busy intersection, he abducted two young girls, aged 9 and 12, 1 block away from the police station. So that is very, very aggressive. Their bodies were found the following morning off of an interstate exit 54 miles east of Rawlins. Because De La Pena had tried so many times in so many towns, it did not take long to find out who he was. Thank goodness. Witnesses described Frank De La Pena as Hispanic and said he spoke with a strong accent. He had curly black hair with a round face and a dark complexion. On May 7th, he was wearing a shirt with girls kneeling on the front of it, a John Lennon pen, a snap brim hat with matching black jacket and pants. He was pretty conspicuous with his white van pulling the camper or travel trailer and trying to give away a puppy that he couldn't find. His van was registered to him in Williston. His travel trailer was registered to him in Utah. After the abduction, he switched the plates on the van and the trailer. On May 9th, he parked the trailer at a KOA campground in Garden City, Kansas. He stayed there for 4 or 5 nights before heading back towards Colorado. Wyoming police called Williston to inquire about De La Pena only a few weeks after Barb disappeared. Frank De La Pena was arrested on May 12, 1981 in Lehman, Colorado, after applying for a job on a seismology crew with the same company, Cephal Geophysical, that's who he worked for in Williston. Frank urged the foreman to call his old boss, and when he did, he was told to get rid of De La Pena and call back. He sent De La Pena to get some dinner and return after. The foreman was informed that De La Pena was wanted for the Rawlins homicides and that he needed to contact law enforcement. The foreman assisted officers in the arrest by setting up a plan where he would have De La Pena ride with him to pick up some permits and be pulled over in what seemed like a routine traffic stop. The rest was uneventful, and De La Pena did not resist. So while in the Lincoln County Jail in Hugo, Colorado, awaiting extradition to Wyoming, De La Pena didn't eat for almost a week. A jailer claimed that De La Pena said he didn't deserve to eat after what he had done. His captors described him as quiet and very polite, always answering with yes, sir, and similar courtesies. Then one day he did start eating again. He refused to sign the extradition papers. He wrote a long and grandiose self-harm letter for the media claiming that he was set up and that he was completely innocent. And on May 22nd, 1981, Frank De La Pena took his own life in his jail cell. It goes on to say, if the testimony of numerous witnesses from different towns along his route alone weren't enough to prove that he was responsible for those homicides, the eyewitness account from one of the victim's brothers who saw De La Pena talking to the girls outside of his trailer just before they disappeared, paired with the physical evidence collected, surpassed what was necessary to seal his fate. Wyoming law enforcement executed their investigation thoroughly, and the Cheyenne Crime Lab handled the evidence meticulously. There was no doubt that Frank De La Pena took the lives of the young girls, and they were going to make sure that he did not get away with it. So what do they know about Frank De La Pena? Francisco Javier De La Pena Chavez was born in Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico on July 24th, 1951. Apparently, his father was Francisco Sr., and his mother was Amelia Chavez de Villa. They were unsure when he came to the United States, but in 1979, he was in Star Valley, Wyoming, working seismology jobs. He had a couple of friends that got married there. He was the best man at their wedding. They learned that De La Pena was married. His wife's name was Consuelo, and he had a son named Frank Jr. According to his friend, Frank had relayed that he had a terrible childhood in Juarez and that he definitely had anger issues. The third person of interest is someone that the writer of this website said they've been dragging their feet on writing about. However, as they have spent nearly another entire day trying to find task and literally anything to do other than write about this man, they know that they have something to say about him. Him being a person of interest is a touchy subject with members of the family. The experiences some describe are the complete opposite of what others experienced with him, and the opinions about the possibility of his involvement follow suit. Frank Cotton was the second born of the 8 surviving children. He was about 32 years old in 1981. He did live in Williston. He stayed at Louise's house periodically throughout the years and dropped in frequently when he wasn't staying there. Williston police have Frank listed as a person of interest, and it is their understanding from James's interview with Williston PD that he was a person of interest before the current investigators took over the case. They are not sure if all of the family members are aware of the reasons that Frank made the list of being a person of interest or not. This could be a major factor in why the opinions seem to differ so much. They also do not claim to know all of the reasons that he made the list, the person of interest list, and it is possible that Williston investigators have additional reasons that possibly they have not disclosed publicly. It goes on to say, as with most cases where there is an ongoing investigation, there are usually key details that are kept from the public in hopes of securing a conviction or verifying information. That is true. The same is true for Barb's case. Frank did pass away in 1999, however, but that does not mean that there isn't someone out there that can prove that he was involved. Furthermore, we can still prove that he wasn't involved. So, seems like they're kind of on the fence, according to the website, about James, about the brother. This next vague point is that thing that even some family members might not be aware of. There are people who don't want to discuss Frank or the experiences that they had involving him. Experiences that have caused them emotional distress over the years. That's completely understandable and needs to be respected. On this note, they say there is one person that has agreed to let her story be shared. She did so with the hope that others who may have had similar experiences with Frank might have the courage to speak out about it. Her mother told the story to James in episode 17 of the podcast. This writer says, I feel compelled to mention that if Frank was actually involved in Barb's disappearance, people sharing their stories could help solve this case. If he was not involved, stories could also help exonerate him. The writer goes on to say, I can't tell Barb's story without including one other common suspicion involving Frank. This is another sensitive topic that receives opinions from both ends of the spectrum. Did Louise know of or suspect Frank's involvement? Obviously, the writer says, I don't know the answer to that. We don't know that Frank was involved. In order to explore possible theories about Louise, we obviously walk through them as if Frank was involved. There are a few scenarios involving Louise having knowledge or a suspicion of Frank's involvement. One scenario would be that Louise did suspect Frank. We have heard the opinion that Louise favored Frank and that she would not have turned him in if he was involved, and that she likely would have covered for him. A similar scenario is that Louise actually knew he was involved and covered for him. Now, this is just, for the record, this is just the opinion of the writers of this website. Nothing has ever been proven that Frank was or was not involved. The other scenario is that if Frank was involved, Louise did not know until much later. And it is still possible that she had suspicions, but maybe she had no idea at all until Frank was passing away. To some, they did notice a change in Louise around the time Frank got sick and passed away. Obviously, losing a child is traumatic and undoubtedly changes most people. However, this change involved Louise's search for Barbara. Louise was perceived by some to be consistently looking for Barb and always hoping that she would come home someday up until Frank was dying. So that's a little bit red flaggy, a little bit concerning. Louise seemed to pretty much give up her search for Barb at this point and resolve that she was never going to come home. They go on to say something that comes to mind immediately when this is discussed is the double headstone that Louise placed for Frank and Barb to share. Frank was not the first of Louise's children to pass away after Barb disappeared. One of her sons passed away in 1993. Frank passed away on June 1st of 1999 of colon cancer. Louise legally declared Barb deceased in 1998, which some believe would have been about the time that Frank started needing his mother's assistance with caring for himself. They say, please remember that these theories are only valid if we assume hypothetically that Frank was involved. The same is true for all of the persons of interest. The writer goes on to say, I'm not someone who makes assumptions often, and I would never hang my hat on anything I can't verify as being true. However, when it comes to a case that has gone on unsolved for 40 years, the writer is unwilling to explore or is willing to explore any and all possibilities, regardless of how unlikely some may feel they are. Until something solid clearly points to a particular suspect, the writer sees no reason to stop brainstorming on the possibilities. There is no shortage of rabbit holes in this case, and no way to know if the correct one has ever been found yet. And at the very least, none have produced a rabbit. Okay, so that was a lot of information to absorb, very important information. I will put a link to the website in the description box so you can go back and read. I didn't read everything from the website, just excerpts. So that's why I'm going to put the link in the description so you can read it for yourself. Make your own decisions about the theories that were put forth on the website. In closing, it says typically Cohen, who's one of the investigators, added that the police department receives a few calls or tips about Barbara's case each year, and while law enforcement has followed up on them, they have hit brick walls. The passage of time, though, has not weakened family and friends' resolve in hoping that they will learn what happened to Barbara. So if you have any information on Barbara's case, her disappearance, anything you may have seen or heard about Barbara, about any person of interest, possible persons of interest, please contact the Williston Police Department at 701-572-1212. All right, guys, that was our missing cold case missing person file of the week. I encourage you, please give it a thumbs up before you leave. Please share it anywhere and everywhere you can to get Barbara's name out there, keep her name out there, keep her story out there so she is not forgotten. Hopefully, there will be some resolution in this case and her family will get the answers and the justice they deserve and the justice that Barbara deserves. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Be careful out there. Take care of each other. That is the most important thing we can do is take care of our fellow human beings. And I will see you next time. Thanks, guys.